In this video, we're going to look at how our functions can apply specifically to economics. So to start with, we're going to get a few definitions. First, the cost function. This is the cost for some manufacturing of a product. The cost equals whatever the company's variable cost is times the number of units it produces plus the company's fixed cost. And so we write that C of Q. That is to say the cost is some function of the quantity of items produced. An additional definition for a company, its marginal cost is its cost for each additional item produced. That is the cost added if, say, they went from 1,000 units to 1,001 units. A revenue function for a company, how much money they bring in, is the selling price times the quantity sold. So for instance, if a company sells 20 items at $10 an item, they would do 20 times 100, and that would tell them how much revenue they bring in. Likewise, marginal revenue, similar to marginal cost, is the revenue generated by selling each additional item. It's important to note that a company breaks even when their cost equals revenue. That is to say, anything after that, they should start making a profit, but they want to determine at least the number of items they need to sell to break even. So let's look at an example. A company makes radios. They have fixed cost of $24,000. So this is for things like their warehouse and machines. No matter what, they're paying this amount of money. And variable cost of $7 per radio. So this is basically the cost to make each individual radio. They sell each radio for $15. Write a function for cost and revenue for this company. So for our cost function, C of Q, we know from our previous slide, cost equals the variable cost times the number of items, so 7Q, plus the fixed cost, 24,000. Their revenue is generated by selling the item, so their revenue would equal 15 times the number of items they sell. At what number of units does the company break even? So to determine the break even, we want cost and revenue to be equal. So we want to determine when does 7Q plus 24,000 equal 15Q. And so essentially what we're doing here is just solving for Q. So what I would do is combine the Q's, and I would move 7Q across the equal sign. So I'm going to subtract it. And I'm choosing to move it that way because what that allows me to do is keep the Q numbers positive. So 24,000 equals 8Q. And if we divide by 8, we get Q equals 3,000. What that is telling us is the company needs to sell 3,000 items to at least break even. So we know cost and revenue are the same thing. So if we want to determine the total cost and revenue at this production level, we could just plug in 3,000 for Q, and it doesn't matter which one we pick because we already stated at this level they should be equal. So I'm going to use this just R of Q equals 15Q because that's easy to calculate. So we want to plug in 3,000 to R. So R of 3,000 equals 15 times 3,000. And we get R of 3,000 equals 45,000. What this is telling us is that when the company produces and sells 3,000 units, their cost and revenue will both be $45,000. So when cost equals revenue, they are actually breaking even. But a company doesn't just want to break even, they want to turn a profit. So we're going to next consider the profit function. To determine a company's profit, we're going to take the revenue, the money that they bring in, and we're going to subtract the cost. Now you'll notice that I used pi of q. And this is a common notation in economics. And the reason that we use pi instead of p is just so that we can associate pi with profit and p with price. So we're going to use our previous example with our radio company. And we already know their revenue their revenue function and their cost function. And we want to write a profit function for this company. So I would say is pi of q equals the revenue function minus the cost function. And you're probably wondering why I'm putting that in parentheses. Well, what you want to be careful to recognize is that plus 24,000, that should really count against profit. So what this minus sign does, if I distribute that minus sign in, is it just helps me recognize that cost is negatively affecting profit. So here I'd say pi of q, our profit for some number of items, equals 15q minus 7q would be 8q. And then the plus 24,000, if I distribute that negative in, would be minus 24,000. And so now we can take any number of items and determine what the company's profit would be for that number of items.